Okay, we're now recording. So before we start off, I wanted to say thank you to the New York State Department of Agri-Markets and Farmland for a New Generation, as we got funding for these workshops through a grant through them with Saratoga Plan. So thank you for all their help, and we make these workshops possible. So we're going to talk about farmland evaluation for farm seekers today. And we're going to be looking at, I get questions a lot at Extension where you have someone who has bought land, whether it's 10 acres or 80 acres, and they're like, I bought a farm and I want a farm. And I'm like, okay, great. What do you want to do? And it's kind of realizing what, deciding, do you want to make your land fit the farming style or what you want to do farm wise, or are you going to take the qualities that your land has and best fit a farming style to it? It's a choice either way. But, and I also get people that say, I want to farm and I want to do an X, Y, and Z, and I'm looking at land. What should I be looking for? So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. So there it is. Okay, so a little introduction, a little bit about me. My name is Nicolina. I work for the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Saratoga County. I am the Farm to School Grant Coordinator. I'm also one of the Agriculture Program Coordinators, and I do the Ag Economic and Development Program. I wear a lot of hats. I also do CC Equine. This is a picture of me, and actually in both pictures, that is the same horse. I quite literally brought him into this world, and that is him as of last winter. He's a pretty big dude. His name is Emmett. He's my big monster. So I am a horse person by default. But another thing too, when we go through these workshops and we talk a lot about looking at farmland and making decisions, and I'm going to be talking about management styles, for everyone to kind of understand. I know what it's like to be you guys, and I know what it's like to be in this situation. I grew up on a farm. We have 100 acres, and managing that is a long process, and Rome was not built in a day. So it's kind of making moves and making decisions and slowly getting things accomplished to kind of go the direction we would like. So where to start? That's kind of the big thing. Like I said, I get people that call us and they say, I bought the land, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, okay. And they send me the address. We kind of look at the land, I'll go out to the farm, and I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but you're not really set up for that, but that's okay. But you need to understand what may need to happen to start farming in that way, whether it's because you want to raise beef cattle or you want to do vegetables, vegetable farmer. Or I have people that say, I want to have a beef farm and I'm looking at this land. What do you think? And I said, well, actually, yeah, you're right on the right track. It has these qualities. These are the things you should be looking for, or that's going to be a lot of work. And just so you know that before you kind of get in over your head. So what do you want to do is, what do you want to do with the land? What's your plan, right? Do you want to be the vegetable farmer? Do you want to be a beef farmer? Do you want to have lawn ornaments out in your field? That costs a lot of money. That's what I do right now. As my husband likes to point out, what's the size of your land? How much land will I need? And with the land I have, what can I maintain sustainably? So what is your goal? Do you want to be able to grow you're going to have livestock. Do you want to be able to grow your own feed for your livestock? That's going to require a lot of acres and a lot of manpower and time and effort. So looking at what you have and what you want to do, what can you realistically maintain? Long-term and short-term goals. As I mentioned before, Rome was not built in a day. For example, I've been on my family farm my whole life. Me and my husband built our house 747 feet down the road. Eventually we will live in the main farmhouse and take over, and my parents will take our smaller home. So we've been really intensely managing that property for about 5 years now. And eventually we'd like to get some beef cattle. We want to get some beef cows. We have horses now, possibly do pigs seasonally. There's things that we want to do. And every year, it was replace all of this fence, 1 year, put up all new gates. We built a run and shed in one field that we use for storage during the winter and, run and shed during the summer. There are little things that get done every year, and we just keep slowly chipping away to get to that main goal. So knowing what those are in advance and seeing what you need to accomplish to get to them. And the management style, what do you want to do? How do you want to do it? You can own horses and own beef cattle and, and I'm starting off just talking about livestock here, but you can do that. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? you can kind of manage them in a bunch of different ways. And it's just how much work you want to do and how involved you want to be. So we're going to talk about a small farm. The definition of a small farm is 231 acres, which seems quite large for a small farm. But a very small farm is considered 9 acres or less. Like, for example, we have 100 acres, so we're kind of like in the middle there. We are considered a small farm. And we are nothing commercial. This is a truly hobby. We're we have people that are 9 to 5 jobs, and this is what we do because we love spending our money on our farm, and apparently we just love being constantly busy, right? And small farms actually dominate the American farming landscape. 88% of US farms are small, with an annual sales of less than 250,000. So it's a little food for thought. So when you have a farm, what do you want to have on it, right? What are the animals? To me, that's the fun part. So if you're going to do cattle, are you going to do dairy or beef? Most of the time when you're looking small scale, you don't really look into the dairy. Doesn't mean you can't. You could absolutely, do it for yourself or for a small scale production. But if you were to sit down and actually figure out the management and the finances of it, it's very labor intensive. Dairy cows have to be milked twice a day, so that needs to be continuously maintained. Beef cattle, there's all different types. We're actually looking into, we want to do longhorns, mostly because I love their hides. And if I'm going to pay to have something out in my field and I'm going to have to manage it and take care of it, I want to like what I'm looking at. And I truly enjoy looking at the longhorns. So that's what we would want to do. There's also Black Angus, there's Herefords, there's crossbreeds of every sort. Horses, while they are considered the beast of burden, because they really don't give us any products, a lot of them are just for pure enjoyment. You can actually use horses to do some of the farm work. I know people that have heavyweight or work horses that do some of that. They're actually great for logging, environmentally friendly for logging. Not always the most popular choice, but can be done. We have goats. Goats can be used for both meat, milk, and fiber. Sheep are for meat and for fiber. And then we have swine, obviously, the beautiful bacon. And you can raise, I mentioned earlier, raising swine seasonally, or you can actually breed them. So seasonally would be, you would get a piglet in the spring and you would raise it up to harvest in the fall time. That's what I grew up doing. And then there's fowl such as ducks, chickens, guinea hens, geese, all different types of things. There we go. All right. Let me just exit out of that. All right, so there's a lot of different farm animals you can choose, and depending on your management style and what you want to do and how you want to take care of your farm will kind of help you decide what you want. For example, is this what you're going to be doing full time? Is this going to be your main source of income? You're not working any other job. You're just managing your farm. Or, you're like me. I have a 9 to 5 job and I do this on the side because I genuinely love the lifestyle. And, I guess I really enjoy the work as well. So, knowing that decision and what you want to do can kind of help steer you. For example, beef cattle, if you're really looking to, have a bottom line and you want to make money off of it, you might not necessarily swing towards longhorns, for example. You want to look more towards a better beef producer. So you're going to swing more towards your Black Angus, Hereford crosses, things like that. So livestock and space. This is a big item that comes up a lot. This is from the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. This is a small piece of a much larger chart. It is actually in one of the attachments that I sent out. And this is kind of the bare minimum what livestock animals need space-wise. And this is for each per one animal. So for example, we have one horse, pasture area, 1 to 2 acres, a beef cow, 1 to 2 acres, dairy cow, 1 to 2 acres, dairy goat, 0.2 to 0.3 acres. Now, what you need to understand is with these large, and it's more for the larger animals, how many acres you will require is going to be based, and we're going to get into management, how you want to take care of them. For example, we have So I had mentioned I have 100 acres, right? We have 5 horses on the premises. I have one field that is, oh God, I think that one's about 5 acres. I have one field that's about a little over 7 acres. And then I have another field that's 3.5 acres. I have very large pastures. I do not feed hay I don't feed hay from May, June till November. My guys are on pasture. I maintain them really well, but I have space for them. We have neighbors down the road who have 2 horses on, I think 7 acres would be generous of their whole entire property. So they have to feed hay all the time. They do have pasture that they do get to eat, but not quite as much as I do. They have to supplement that. You know, if you have beef cows that are on 1 to 2 acres, you're not going to have the adequate amount of pasture to, you know, keep them on pasture. You're going to have to supplement, and hay costs money. And every year it always seems to cost more, right? So how you're going to manage them is going to be a little bit different. And then when you get into sheeps and goats, you know, how big of an exercise yard, how big is their enclosed structures, how big of a barn are you going to need, what type of barn are you going to need? That's all going to vary depending on what you have and what you want. And so I always talk about management styles. There's more than one way to skin a cat. The size of the farm is going to really impact that. How many acres are you working with? You know, we get a lot of 10 to 15 acres is a really pretty average size I see for people who want to be homesteaders and do this like little backyard farm. It's very common. That's a good size. They say, well, the property's 15 acres. And I said, okay, great. Well, if you look at 15 acres, let's see, what does your house sit on? What do the garages sit on? Do you have a barn? What does that sit on? And you start taking away that space little by little. And then I'm like, okay, what do you have for open space versus what do you have for, you know, woods? It starts to kind of get cut up really fast. Your livestock choices. So are you going to do, hold on, my brain is catching up to my mouth here. So your size of your farm is gonna depend on what type of livestock you choose. For example, if you're someone who's working on very few acres, a horse and a cow might just not be realistic. And I'm gonna give my little spiel about doing your homework, just because you live in the country. And like, for example, that lovely sheep back there said you only need 1 to 2 acres to have a horse or a cow. Doesn't mean you can own a horse or a cow on 1 to 2 acres based on where you live. Check with your town codes, check with your villages. There are sometimes minimums to have animals. Some areas you have to have 5 acres per horse. I actually know in some places you need 10 to 15 acres per horse. I do think that's a tad excessive. But those regulations are in place for a reason. So make sure you do your homework. It even comes down to chickens and goats. For example, in the city of Saratoga, in the city limits of Saratoga, you are allowed to have 6 chickens and no roosters, and they cannot be free range. They have to be kept in a fenced in area. Know what you can and can't do based on where you are. But your size of your farm is going to really impact what you choose to do and what animals you decide to have. And it's available income, right? I like to call myself a farmer that's kind of a bit of a baller on a budget. You know, if I had infinite funds, I would have the barn of my dreams and any type of style fencing I would like, but that's just not realistic, right? You know, what can I maintain? I have 5 horses now. At this point, I couldn't take on any more. I mean, I possibly could, but you know, I'm used to them living and myself living a certain lifestyle, and I'd like to maintain that. So, you know, I couldn't financially bring on any more. The fencing that I choose is based off of what I have available for income, and also kind of the landscape that I have to work with, and time. Again, are you a 9 to 5, you know, you work a 9 to 5 job and you're coming home and before dinner or after dinner going out like I was taking care of animals before I did this. You know, taking care of animals and doing things. Are you going to be doing this full time? You know, the management style you choose may require a little bit more time and labor intensive. Okay. So for example, this is just kind of food for thought. And this is this is out of the NRCS balancing your animals with your forage. So this is, I mentioned I only feed hay so many months out of the year. So I have my horses on pasture, which sounds really great. But there's a lot more to it. So how many animals should be on your pasture, or how many acres of pasture do you need, do your animals need? Is it, which one are you kind of working with? You have a limited amount of land, so that means you can only get so many animals. Or do you have, a fixed number of animals? So how much, area will you need for them to graze, and figuring that out? This is out of that attachment that I sent, and you can look a little bit more into that. So here's an example. And this is, it's a lot of information. And honestly, I'm going to pull up the next slide, and there's going to be a lot of math, and you're going to be like, why are you doing this to me at 6:30 in the evening? But it's kind of food for thought, and to understand what you're going to think about. For example, it's example farm, beefy acres. It's cute. It's a cow-calf operation. Now, if you notice here, this is in the Southeast, which means they are able to pasture 365 days out of the year. We do not have that option. But you have a total of 20 acres of pasture. And it goes down as to what's in your pasture, right? It's broomgrass, ryegrass, fescue. Just because it's green doesn't necessarily mean that there's nutritional value. That's kind of a hard concept for people to sometimes grasp. Pastures, and I could probably do an entire webinar just on pastures here. But pasture management takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And you need to know what's out there. You need to know soil qualities. You need to know what you have to do to manage it. It has to be cut at a certain height. You don't want to cut too low. You don't want to wait too late and get it to be too tall and it goes to seed. But then also, how much forage are they actually getting? So there's this kind of rule of thumb that says it takes 1.5 to 2 acres to feed a cow-calf pair for 12 months. That means that 1.5 to 2 acres cannot just be our lawn. We just like fence off a 2-acre part of our lawn and we say, okay, cows, be free. And they can eat off of it. It needs to be really well maintained. It needs to have good quality grass out there. That means you have to mow it, which means you need a tractor, you need a mower, you're going to need fuel, you're going to need time to mow it. You're going to have to mow it at the correct time. You're also going to have to possibly buy seed and put seed down. See, it adds up kind of quick. So knowing that, so they go through, and if you decide, there are formulas that you can do. So for the total number of animals, okay, so you know that you have 20 acres, and how many animals can 20 acres feed? And knowing your, how many grazing days you have, your average animal weight, and your average yield per acre. This is a lot of information and a lot of math. I apologize. It can feed 11 animals. You can always stock less, right? You can always have a little bit too much, or a little bit, you can always have a little bit too much feed out there. That's fine. But you wouldn't want to exceed that in any way. So now down here, you know that you have 11 animals, okay? And so you go through and you do the math, and it does come out to 20 acres. So that rule of thumb actually does hold here. That 1.5 to 2 acres does work. And this is kind of just some food for thought to, realize like what to think about. I'm looking at a piece of land. So when I talk about your field management, so this is one of the management styles. This is a choice you can have. And this is field or pasture rotation. And so if you look here on the picture on the left, I actually have a little drawing tool. That'll work. So you have here on your left, a beautiful circle. This is called continuous non-rotational grazing. You have all your animals just kind of loose out in the field, and you let them eat and do whatever all the time. And what happens is animals tend to like to eat the good stuff. They're like kids, right? We want to eat our favorite parts of the meal first, and we leave the stuff we don't like last. And we probably won't eat it because we don't want to eat it. And we'll find other ways, like we'll break out of the fence and go somewhere else. The other option is you do a basic rotation. So this field would be cut up into 4. And they would be here for 2 weeks. And then we would switch them over to this pasture, and they'd be here for 2 weeks. And then we'd move them to here, and they'd be here for 2 weeks. And what that does is it gives the other parts of the pasture time off. It gives it rest. It gives it time to grow. So as soon as the cows or the horses or goats, swine can actually graze as well. Once they are moved from this area, you mow the field. It's like you reset it and wipe the slate. Everything's growing at the same rate now. And they're going to be eating here for 2 weeks and causing chaos and pooping on things and, running it up, making a mess. And then after that 2 weeks, we move them over here. This field gets mowed, wipe the slate clean, and you'll kind of let everything grow. This is an intensive rotational grazing. So that's not a very good. I was never an artist in school, if you can't tell. Okay, so now instead of cutting it up into 4s, you have it cut up into 8ths. Yes, more than 8ths. So they'll be here for 3 days. They'll be here for 3 days. They'll be here for 3 days. What that means is every 3 days you have to go out and move your cows, and that can sometimes be a pain in the butt. It can be an event to have to move livestock, especially if you have large numbers of them. More than likely this is a permanent fencing here. And all of these little red lines in the middle are temporary fencing. So that means you have to move the temporary fencing. Also very labor intensive. Here you're only doing it every 2 weeks. That's not too bad. You can plan for it. Okay, Saturday's the big day, all hands on deck. Everyone in the family gets together and we move them all over. Every 3 days, yeah, it is all hands on deck, but it becomes very labor intensive. So this is a way to set that up. This is actually how I set up my pastures. And I have an overhead view of our farm, so I can kind of, show that to you guys so you can look at. This is one way to set it up. So this is, where your water is. You got shelter. That's why it's labeled shelter. And this is kind of like a dry lot. So there's really no grass here. It could be stone dust. It could be, whatever you want. And then this makes it really easy. If they're on pasture 1 for 2 weeks, you just open the gate and you let them out. And then you coax them with grain, because most of farm animals are opportunistic eaters. So you'll shake the grain, they come in here, close the gate, and then you open the gate to pasture 2. They're out to pasture 2 for 2 weeks. And you kind of, go accordingly. It works really well. It's what I do. Makes life a lot easier. I can set this fence up and it's good for the season. I only have to, my main fence on the outside is up for all the time. And then come spring or whatever, I'll put up my temporary fencing and I just keep an eye on it throughout the year. And that's how we set it up. So what to look for in land? Okay, so things to think about. And this, again, I'm speaking in this side for, livestock. This is actually a satellite view of my farm. This is my house that I built 747 feet down the road. And this is the main house here, the farmhouse where my parents live at this point. And these are our pastures. Okay. And you can actually see this little, lovely little dirt line. That's my temporary fence that I put in. This whole field's about 7 acres-ish. Okay. So this gets split up in the summertime. So this is what we have. We have 100 acres. Less than 25% of it is pasture right now. But when you look at it, like if we had this land for sale and you were to come and you were to look at what we had, what are some qualities to look for in land? You always ask people, is there open space? If you want to have livestock, you got to have a place to put them, and not even a barn. Like, you got to have space. You got to have fields, pasture, something, open space of some form. Drainage. You don't want to build a farm on a swamp. That's really important. The soil type that you have. We have a sandy, loamy soil here. This is actually like the highest point of this is the highest grade of this field. So it drains down. This is our winter pasture. And I know that, I've been there my whole life, so I'm well aware of the way the water flows. This is our field during the winter. Horses are fed up here pretty much all winter long. I just constantly replace my round bales up here. And then as the snow gets so deep and I can't drive out with the tractor, I will eventually come down lower. What's your drainage? Accessibility to water. Is there a well dug on the property? There are other water sources. For example, we have a pond. This is man-made. We have a lot of water on our property. We live in Galway, so there's a lot of water in that area to begin with. So is there a well already drilled? You know, let's say whether or not there's a house on it. You know, if there's not a well drilled, are there other water sources? Is there a pond? Can you utilize that for water? I don't know if anyone's ever heard of an artesian well. Our property is full of them, actually, and the fact that in the past, I'm 27, in the past 27 years, we've had 3 additional artesian wells actually pop up. So we have one here, and there's another one here, and another one here. Artesian wells is actually where water will kind of come up from the ground. It'll like flow out. This one here has been there as long as my dad's been here, and he bought the farm in the early 70s. That hole is over 50 feet deep. It's about 4 feet or 3 feet wide, and it's over 50 feet deep. We've actually put a 50-foot pole down there. We never hit bottom. And during the springtime, water will just like a geyser just kind of come out of it. It's in the middle of the woods, so we have water. It is there available. If there wasn't, you know, if we weren't living there and there wasn't a house, theoretically we could pump water. It would be a pain, don't get me wrong, but there is a water source there. Road accessibility. A lot of times people will see these properties and it's a beautiful piece of property, but there is no road frontage. There's no way to get to it. Or the road that they get to it is a very much a seasonal road. It's kind of a tractor road. You have a right of way. Those are really important things to look for. Soil type, again, and it's funny, when you look at farms our side of the county, we're very soil, sandy loam. If you look over in Schuylerville, that's clay loam, or clay soil. Clay seals and holds water. My problem where I live, while it is sandy and it's nice, it drains, I have bedrock. And I have bedrock anywhere from 2 inches to 2 feet below the surface. You never know which one you're at. And it makes putting up fence posts practically impossible. We even have bedrock in this one field, in this one spot, like right here. I have bedrock that comes right out of the top of the, right out of the soil. It's coming right out. So it's funny if I talk to people in Schuylerville and I, you know, tell them what I'm doing and they're like, oh my God, how do you live over there? That bedrock is such a pain. I look at theirs and I go, how do you deal with all this mud? You do learn how to deal and cope. There are different management styles for different types of soil types, but that's something to be aware of. You know, if you're going to have a lot of beef cattle on a farm, you know, understand high points, low points, water drainage, where water runoff is going to go. That's going to help you decide where you're going to put buildings, where you're going to put pasture, what seasonal pasture it's going to be. This is a winter pasture because it's close to our barn. This is the barn. I don't want to have to walk far in the snow to get them in. It's convenient. It's large enough. I feed them out, you know, far away. There's a reason for it. Infrastructure. I see a lot of people that look at farmland and for example, they buy 25, 30 acres. And this 25, 30 acres was a part of an original farm that's further down the road. So the house and the buildings are not going with it, but they just get this, you know, 30 acres. And they're looking at another property that's 15 acres and it has a barn on it and a house. But this 30 acres is completely open and it has all the fencing hooked, you know, it's got all the fencing, let's say whether or not it's got a well dug, you know, and they're like, well, they're looking back, you know, they want more cattle. They want to have more pasture, but they're like, you know, hey, the other place has got a barn. I say, yeah, well, this 30 acres has got high tinsel fencing. Do you know how much that costs? Do you know what it would cost to put in? Do you know the maintenance on it? You know, you might, you know, do you like the house? Well, no, it's an old farmhouse. We're going to have to tear it down anyway. Okay, well, so the house isn't doing you any favors. Well, the barn is okay. The barn set up. It's going to need a lot of, you know, fixing. Fencing is big infrastructure. That's a huge thing. Having to clear woodlands is also, it's a pain to have to clear lots. We cleared ours for our house. You know, it takes time. Are you going to pay somebody to come in and do it? You're going to do it yourself. So these are things to look for when you're looking at land. And it seems kind of, you know, silly. But a big thing when we go, and a lot of times we have people, they already bought the farm and they have all the barns laid out. And I said, okay, what are you going to do when there's 8 feet of snow and it's -20? And they're like, what? Where are you going to put all the snow? And they looked at me and I said, well, you gotta get to the farm animals, right? What are you gonna do in the winter? If you can have things set up and managed and laid out and thought of when it's, 4 feet of snow with a negative 20-degree wind chill in the middle of January, when you are regretting all of your farming choices up until that point. If you can make your life as convenient as possible, then 9 times out of 10, the rest of the year, you're going to be okay. For example, this is our, in between all of our barns and our building, I made enough red on this page. This is all plowed out. I have spaces where I push snow. I don't put buildings. I don't put fence there because I need a place to put the snow. And yeah, it's only a few months out of the year, but I will tell you, when that weather comes, it is a huge inconvenience if it's, not made as easy as possible. It's a big thing for people to think about. Water drainage runoff is a big one, and you usually don't always see that right away. Also, what affects those things is buildings. If you don't already have a barn, putting a building up will redirect the flow of water and how it can affect you later. So there's always a lot to think about, and we could have an hour conversation about each one of these topics, but it's definitely some things to think about. And this is, again, like I said, it's my little planned paradise that is eternally a work in progress. So originally we were going to have Jessica Holmes speaking, but since she is not doing well, again, it looks like I'm going to be a one-woman show this evening. So she was going to talk a little bit about horticulture. So I am of the livestock expert, and she does the horticulture stuff. I do a lot of it with her. It is a little bit more of her area of expertise. I can answer pretty much probably the majority of your questions. If there is anything that is a little bit more in depth, I'm happy to take those questions, and I will actually send them to her and have her get back to you. So we're going to look at horticulture is, gardening, crop farming, landscaping. This is a beautiful picture, right? Like a beautiful patchwork. There are different styles. So there's small scale, large scale, and commercial. Most of the people that are on here tonight or that would listen, a lot of you guys are small scale. You could possibly be considered large scale, but and then, commercial, obviously it's a big commercial business and you're producing a lot. So growing vegetables. So, all right, you go to buy the land. So now I'm not a livestock person anymore. I am a vegetable farmer that's looking to buy a piece of property. Whether or not it has a house on it and I'm going to live there, or if I'm just going to have my farm here. What do I want to look at? Well, you do want to look for open space, right? But first you want to look at the soil qualities. pH is a huge thing. pH, so for vegetables, this is a whole list right here of all the different target pHs that you're going to want for all these different types of vegetables. You're going to look for a 5.8 to a 6.2, but a 6.5 is decent and it's plenty good. As you see, the majority of these are going to sit at 6.5. But when you're looking at land and you have this, you're going to be growing vegetables, set yourself up for success. If you're coming down between, 2 different properties you want to buy, or if you're looking at land and you're looking to put it in 2 different places, try not to make it so you pick the place with the soil that needs the most pH adjustments. Let's work smarter, not harder. Possibly, you want to take some pH samples and look at what you have and say, okay, well, I'm a little, more acidic, so I'm going to plant things that are more for that type here. Again, why make more work for yourself? Soil type is huge. Again, you want to know what type of soil you're working with and to understand that's going to change how you're going to manage it. If you have sandy loam soil, there's going to be really great drainage. But it's also not going to hold a lot of water, which means when you get those really big dry spells, your soil's not necessarily always going to be able to retain moisture. So that could possibly be a problem. But then clay will also seal it too much and it'll hold water, you'll end up drowning your plants. So soil type's a big one. Again, as I mentioned, drainage, organic matter. So you're going to want about 3% organic matter in your soil. And you're going to want to look at the nutrient levels such as phosphorus, iron, calcium, potassium, things like that. Is there too much in your soil? Is there not enough? those are going to also depend on the type of fertilizers you go for. And then you also need to know what type of fertilizers are available or not available based on the state you live in. You know, us being here in New York, I do not know all of the different regulations on fertilizers and things of that nature, but I'm sure I could get you the information. So then there's environmental, shade, sun, building and trees. And is the land already cleared? That's a huge one. I've actually gone to a few places, and while I went there to talk about livestock, they did also bring up gardening, growing vegetables, and we talked about things. And they had this really beautiful spot, and these people wanted to put in a garden. And I said, okay. And it was very shaded. They got a lot of really good morning sun, but afternoon it was fairly shaded. And they said, well, you know, I want to grow these things. And I said, have you thought about lettuce? They looked at me and I was like, you got a lot of trees here and you got a lot of shade. Instead of cutting down all these big, beautiful trees, why don't you like grow lettuce or grow crops that don't do as well with that direct hot afternoon sun and they need a little bit more shade? You know, why make more work for yourself? Buildings and trees have to go with that shade sun. A lot of people will do these big, beautiful, nice square gardens behind their barn. And then, you know, and I didn't think about this until I started working extension, and because I was always a livestock person until I got more into the, you know, learning more about the vegetables and the horticulture side. I was like, oh yeah, buildings create really big things of shade, which block the sun. The sun allegedly has a lot to do with growing things. So I never thought about it up until then. And that could be something as well. So you sometimes use those things to your advantage. And is the land already cleared? I've talked with a lot of people, whether they were growing crops in it or turning it into pasture or, you know, putting down vegetables, and they wanted to clear a whole wood lot. And I said, okay, but you know, it's not going to be as simple as cutting down the trees and then throwing, you know, turning over the soil. It's cutting down the trees. It's removing the stumps, removing, you know, if there's any other big boulders and stuff in there as well, you don't want to ruin equipment. You have to turn the soil over. You know, you want to take a pH, you want to see what the nutrients is. A lot of times you want to let that soil sit for, you know, a year, you know, and sit fallow. There's a couple things that you want to do. So you also want to look at your water needs. You're different. Again, do you have a well? Do you have access to water easily? I know a lot of people will buy separate pieces of land and put up a greenhouse of one sort or another, or they have all the livestock in one area, you know, and they have the main farm, and then they buy a plot further down the road and they put in their garden or whatever there, or they put the garden out in the middle of the field because it has, you know, full sun all the time. Are you going to run a hose? I will tell you from someone who does not have water actually in their barns. My barns are extremely old. I run hoses during the winter and people think I'm a lunatic. I know you're not running hoses in the winter for vegetables, but it sucks just as much to have to run, you know, a couple 100 feet of hose when it's 100 degrees out. You know, how are you going to get water out there? Do you have to drill a well? That can be very costly. Crop rotation. So if you're buying a farm or you have one and these crops were grown before, what was grown before there? There's a lot of, you need to do crop rotation because plants, the way that plants function is they take nutrients from the soil. They do also put some in, but they will take some out. And what happens is, for example, and I'm going to talk about this in more of a crop form rather than these vegetables, because that is what I am most familiar with. Corn is a notorious nitrogen leacher. Well, I guess that's a vegetable. I'm thinking of cow corn, but corn can also be a vegetable. So corn is a nitrogen leacher. You plant corn and it sucks the nitrogen out of the soil. And it sucks it out and sucks it out and sucks it out. It's notorious for that. And, you know, you see if you plant corn in the same spot year after year after year after year, what do you think your soil is going to be deficient in? Nitrogen, right? So a great way that they do that on much larger crops is they'll do cover crops, or they will do a crop rotation of a legume, clover, bird's foot trefoil, something that is rich in nitrogen, and it actually will put nitrogen back into the soil. So, you know, in doing that, you have to use less fertilizers. So you're going to want to constantly rotate your crops. So knowing what was there before, how it was managed before, it's going to affect how you're going to do it now. And, also different vegetables and different fruits and vegetables and plants of any type. Also changing families, because there are diseases and pests that will affect different families of vegetables and different families of plants. And if you constantly have the same family in there, those the blights and whatever, they're just going to thrive in that soil, and you can't always necessarily get them out. So constantly changing it up. How are you going to start seeds? Direct sow, you're going to put them right into the ground and have them grow from there. Are you going to start seeds in a greenhouse? Or are you going to buy transplants? That's going to differ. How you choose to do it is how you're going to manage them. Do you have a greenhouse to start seeds in? That's a great one to start with. You're going to buy transplants. It's great. They're a good size, hardy enough to go in the ground. It can also be very costly. And wildlife, the lovely wildlife and the deer. Maybe putting your garden right next to the woodlot might not be the best choice. Or if you do, you're going to have to invest in a deer fence. And when you talk about deer fences, I guess that's a different conversation, but knowing it's not always height, but like how they function, a proper deer fence, they're baited, they touch it, they get zapped, they learn not to go through it. The bunnies and the squirrels and the chipmunks and all those other guys, getting in and kind of knowing you're going to make it really easily accessible for them. And that's, it can be costly to put up those fences and having to constantly, fight against Mother Nature. So growing fruit. This is a great one. And we see a lot because I actually just had someone call me about this. They were looking at a piece of property and they were like, we're looking at this, or we bought it. I've heard it both ways. And they're like, it has an old apple orchard on it. I'm like, okay, well, what are your expectations for this apple orchard? Well, we want to see, if we can salvage them and or whatever. And sometimes it's worth just removing them and planting new than it is to try to kind of revamp what you already got. So this is actually a really common question that we get. But when you're looking to grow fruits, we're going to go over the basics of what they need. Soil pH about 6 to 7. The soil type, again, you want something that is a little bit better drainage, but you can grow in clay. It's just you're going to have different management styles, and you're going to have to take care of your fruit differently. Organic matter around 3%. You're going to want to check your nutrient levels. Again, understanding shade, sun, buildings, trees. I'm not going to go over that again. It's still, the same idea. Those are the things that you want to look for. If you want to grow blueberries, get the pH for blueberries. If you want to grow apples, and understanding that every fruit type is going to have different pH requirements, they will actually grow better in different soil types. So being aware of that before you get into it is also very helpful. Because again, it's sometimes easier to, well, I wanted to do apple trees, but turns out I am set up perfectly for blueberries. So maybe I should just make the switch to blueberries, or I can fight the fight and plant those darn apple trees and try to rewrite Mother Nature. It can be done. It can just be very time consuming and costly. Okay, I'm just gonna check how I'm doing for time. Okay, we're not doing too bad. All right, so growing fruit, water needs. Again, do you have water? How are you going to water them? Are you going to haul water in? I don't know if anyone's ever done that. It's not fun. I speak from that personally. Time to yield. How old are the transplants? So this is where we're going to get into where people have an orchard. Okay. They bought this beautiful house, got really nice little apple orchard. Okay. Well, what do you want to do? Is it for your own enjoyment? Are you just going to go out and pick your apple trees, pick your apples and have fun? Are you looking to make it a you pick? Are you looking to actually harvest apples from it and sell the apples? What is your plan? And the biggest reason is apple trees and fruit trees, they have a life expectancy on them. After so many years, they're not going to produce nearly as well. The trees will become they will have damage to them, especially where they pruned. If they haven't been pruned and taken care of in so many years, and pests, sprayed with herbicides and pesticides. And I know some people don't want to hear that, but honestly, if you want to have trees that are able to produce, sometimes these things are needed. They get blights and they get diseases and they get pests that come in and will completely destroy it. It'll kill the tree. So sometimes it is good to just take out the trees and plant all new. Sometimes it's not worth it. What variety are they? If you're looking to do a U-pick, there are very common, a lot of people do them now, they're dwarf trees. So they have regular apple tree varieties, but they come in a dwarf variety. So they're a little bit shorter, so they're easier for U-pick, for people to go out and do the U-picks. They also produce within 2 to 3 years. Now, in 2 to 3 years, they will produce fruit. It's not a full crop that you would normally get, but compared to a regular full-size fruit tree can take up to sometimes 8 years to have a full producing harvest. So, that's something to consider. And also too, with newer trees and sometimes newer plants, you're kind of starting, what you're starting with, right? You're not having to go in and go, all right, well, they've never been pruned. They haven't been pruned in 20 years. And I got to prune them all. Are they actually going to produce? The trees are not in a good shape. We have pests, I have bugs that are boring in them, things of that nature. I want to do a U-pick, or possibly, do you have harvesting equipment with the property? Are you set up to harvest apple trees? And they have those really cute, iconic little ladders, and those work. They're great and everything, but imagine all day setting up the ladder, walking up the ladder, picking the apples, walking down the ladder, moving the ladder over, walking up the ladder, picking all the apples, going down the ladder, moving the ladder. See, it gets to be a lot, unless of course you're extremely tall. So that's also something to think about too. Maybe if you want to leave the apple trees for aesthetic in a certain area, or decide we want to go with all dwarf varieties because we don't have the harvesting equipment to do deal with what we have, and all that. So it's definitely a lot to think about. The apple tree, we get it all the time. Like, I have a beautiful apple orchard, and I'm like, okay, it feeds the deer and it's very picturesque and it's pretty, but are you looking to actually harvest these apples and make something out of them? So Christmas trees. This is a fun one. I get this question all the time for the ag, when people call and they want to get the ag tax exemption, because there's a fun rule with Christmas trees that you can get it ahead of time before you can kind of get it in advance with Christmas trees, but there's a lot of other formalities that go along with that. But this is a great one. I know a lot of people like to do it. A friend of mine's very much into this. I actually live right next door to Bob's Trees, so quite familiar with the Christmas tree industry. After Thanksgiving, every single car that goes by our house has a Christmas tree strapped to it. So again, you want to look at soil quality. Every plant has what they would prefer to grow in. They're very particular plants, I found. They like pH about 6.5. They do like a well-drained soil. They like organic matter around 10%. The time to yield, and this is the big thing for people, this is a long game. It take 8 to 10 years before you can harvest them. So this is planting for the future. So you plant your Christmas trees, and they will take about 8 to 10 years to become a full maturity where you would harvest them. And you also want to plant, if you're going to plant a whole field, you don't want to plant the entire field, and expect, okay, I'm going to plant 50 trees this year, and in 8 years, I'm going to harvest 50 trees. And then you have nothing. So you kind of also want to do it in increments, so you can, you have different generations that are going, so you can harvest. Another thing, people look at a field and they're like, oh, I could plant 100 Christmas trees out there. I was like, yeah, maybe not 100. And then we start figuring it out. And I said, well, you got to leave 5 to 8 feet in between each tree. And they said, well, why? And I said, well, you want a pretty looking Christmas tree. You ever been to the Christmas tree places? And they have the really well-kept ones that are trimmed, and they're very picturesque, and the tall, skinny, and the short and plump. And then you got the really messed up ones. It's got a couple extra arms. They actually have to be trimmed. People think that Christmas trees are a set it and forget it type thing. You plant them in the ground and you mow around them and you're good to go, but they actually do have to be pruned and trimmed like the apple trees, to keep that really nice shape. So you want to plant them about 5 to 8 feet away, because as they start as little guys, they are eventually going to grow into these nice, big, fat, beautiful Christmas trees. But you need to be able to get around them to trim them. You also need to leave roadways, roadways in between each where you can mow to mow the grass down, to keep pests down, and also to be able to, look at the trees, identify them, see what's going on with them, see if there's any type of damage being done to them. And also for harvesting, you're not just going to want to take a chainsaw or, an axe and, go trompsing through the field, having to cut down trees. You want to be able to take a vehicle down it when you go to harvest as well. And there's also scouting, and you want to do scouting. There's a lot. When I first started, I knew about Christmas trees, but not nearly as much as I do now. And there are a lot of pests and blights and diseases that can run rampant in different varieties of Christmas trees. So if you buy a farm, or you have land that already has some that were intentionally planted, again, were they pruned? Were they maintained? Were there herbicides and pesticides that were sprayed? What was used? Do we already have issues? If you've got issues on these trees and they've got bugs and everything else, get them out of there. Plant all new. It's worth it. Trust me. Or if you're going to plant these Christmas trees in an area where they already have all these big, beautiful pines to admire and aspire to grow to one day. Okay, well, you're planting them next to other pines. What do those trees have going on with them? Is there going to be a crossover here? Are they going to, more or less, are they going to catch things from the wild trees? These are kind of things to think about when you're going to look at it. And also to what is the management going to be on these things? We get that a lot of people, they think, well, we'll just plant them and leave them. And there actually is a little bit more, tending that they do need. I mean, it's not nearly as much as, my expensive field ornaments like horses out in the field, or, when you're planting and weeding, a big, garden, but they do require some maintenance. And the last one that we're going to talk about is maple production. This is actually one that I really would like to dabble in, and I haven't quite convinced my husband yet. But we're getting there. So maple production, when you look at it, okay, a lot of times what happens I see with this, people buy a farm and then they kind of realize afterwards, they're like, well, I've got a bunch of maple trees. Why don't I do, all night make maple syrup? It's already here. And that's kind of actually where we sit. We have a lot of maple trees on our property, and our neighbors and a couple other people do it. And I work with Extension, so I've done a lot of these maple workshops. So I'm like, I'm here talking all this big maple talk. I want to get involved too. So if this is your main goal and this is what you want to do, again, there are different soil qualities in pH, organic matter, so on and so forth. Your time to yield. This is where I'm going to talk about it, because this is the biggest impact. If you do not already have mature maple trees to harvest from, it can take up to 40 years for these guys to grow from seed sapling to grow up to a mature tree where you can actually harvest sap. So plant maple trees for your children, and then hope you got some that you can utilize now. A maple tree has to be 10 to 12 inches in diameter to be tapped. You can tap red, silver, and sugar maple trees. Sugar maples do produce the most sugar and the best sap, but you can also tap red and silver. If these mature trees do not already exist on the property, you can buy fairly, and I say mature with air quotes, you can buy fairly mature maple trees, and plant them. It's extremely expensive. And they're not necessarily fully mature. You would have to plant them and, raise them for a few years and get them, a little bit established before you could start tapping. So that can be very costly. Another thing too, it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So understanding, exactly, if you only have one tree that you're tapping, okay, well, I mean, you can have some trees that, that are so large you can put multiple taps in. You're probably not going to be running a full up Sugar Shack maple house on Maple Weekend with that one tree. Will you boil some for yourself? Yeah, absolutely. But being aware that it does take a lot of time, and that it takes a lot of sap. how many trees do you have on the property? You know, if that's something you're looking into, going out and being able to identify these trees, identify them properly, and to know what you're working with. Again, looking at them and see if there is any type of damage, distress, pest, disease on the trees that could possibly be affecting them. So that's a big one to look at as well. But it's great. This is one that, you know, you buy 20 acres and you have your, you know, 3 cows and your chickens and a horse, and you've got, you know, your little greenhouse that you put up, and then you're like, well, we've got a whole back, you know, 4 acres of maple trees. Why don't we utilize that? And when you're going, you know, and I'll touch on this briefly, when you're looking into tax exemptions and ag exemptions and those type of things, they're looking at the percentage of your land that's utilized for agriculture, and maple taps do put that woodland into agriculture production. So that's a good way to look at it as well. Do I have any questions? I'm sorry if I went through that kind of fast. It is exactly 7 o'clock. That was fairly good timing on my part.